Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. I'm flying solo, kind of, today. Mr. Hope is probably jetting off somewhere exotic, or maybe just going to London or something similar, which is kind of normal for Steve. But I am very, very pleased to be joined by a special guest today, we're going to be having a really interesting conversation about some upcoming events and ways that people can get involved in that, but also to talk about what this means for the future of education when it comes to specifically around engineering. And without further ado, it makes a lot of sense to mention the other person in the room. Obviously, Steve's not in, but obviously many of you will be able to see Hilary Leevers is in the call with us today. Thank you for joining us, Hilary, on the Edufuturists podcast. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about you, your background, and then we can get into talking about why you're so passionate about engineering.
Hi, yes, so I'm Hilary Leevers. I'm CEO at Engineering UK, and that's a charity whose purpose is to inspire, inform, and enable more young people from all backgrounds to get into engineering and technology. And I think that stems from a very early passion for me. And my first job was in engineering, and I was really keen on physics and maths and the wider STEM subjects. I took a little detour on the way into fully engineering via psychology and working in science policy and then wider education and learning at the Wellcome Trust. But when this role came up, I was really attracted to it as a sector, but also a sector with a really tricky problem. And, you know, as all good engineers should, I thought it was a tricky problem I'd like to have a little go at unpicking.
Tricky problems to unpick, right? So,
Yeah.
I like that phrase, and I like the idea of how that attracted you to the role and to the organisation, because the truth is that education per se is a tricky role, isn't it? And it's a tricky situation, and navigating industry readiness, because and we'll obviously that'll come up in the conversation today, and making sure that what we are doing in schools, colleges, universities prepares young people for not just for the world of work, but for the world and the future and life is super, super important. And I think it makes a lot of sense for us to kind of unpick that idea around your navigation journey. There sounds. I wrote something recently about squiggly careers based on the stuff. Obviously, the brilliant podcast that's about called Squiggly Careers.
Yes,
But also Todd Rose's work in The End of Average, talking about jagged profiles and squiggly careers, and having that as a background from being an engineer, going into psychology and neuroscience, and then coming back into this space with a bit of education in that background as well.
Yeah.
What made you go on that squiggly career path?
Oh, do you know what? This is great because I followed my passions, right? So for the most part, I was attracted probably to the freshness of something new, a new space, and kind of the adrenaline rush you get when you're out of your depth in some aspects, but also actually realize you've got something different to bring because you haven't come up the usual pathway. And I find that very stimulating. I really like it as an opportunity. But the reason why it's exciting, because I said I'm following my passions, is because that is a theme we will come back to later. That's absolutely what we're trying to encourage young people to recognize the way in which their passions line up with engineering and technology careers. But I would also say that I was a bit put off from the pathway which I originally was so intent on, which was really, much more engineering and physics oriented. And I just was struggling with the interpersonal environment of the physics department. I felt much more comfortable in psychology. So that I think, and that continues to be a challenge, and particularly for young women, to actually see themselves in those environments. And that's when I talk about the tricky problems. It's making sure that all young people understand what engineering and technology is, and enough are inspired to go into it, But the bit that has been so persistently challenging is actually to improve the diversity of that workforce.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we are super passionate about on the podcast, and
Thank goodness, or I'd be off.
and I think what's brilliant is that it's not about tokenism, right? So we're not just about let's get more girls into engineering
No.
because they're underrepresented. That is one reason, but the actual reason is that we need to make sure that the right voices are at the table, and
Absolutely.
and acknowledging that this is not about diversity for diversity's sake. It's diversity to bring diverse and divergent thinking into the space. To quote those that Matthew Said's work and others that talk about that need for more than one set of voices, and we aren't immune to the truth that a lot of those voices have been male, pale, and stale.
Yeah.
We acknowledge that, and we say that about education too, right? So we say it about we talk about AI and technology and edtech spaces. They tend to be very and have been, and therefore we have to actively address that by encouraging that, right? So it's not ignoring it and putting our heads in the sand and pretending it'll go away. It's addressing that, and I think that is worth speaking at there, right? So
yeah, and I was just going to say, it's not just about having the diversity that improves the productivity and the innovation, all those things we know that is brilliant, and it is also about equitable outcomes. But it's really important, I think, particularly in engineering, where you're identifying which are the most important problems to be addressing. And so it isn't just having a range of people coming up with solutions that meet their needs. It's actually saying, no, this is the most important problem in our lives. And I think that's the most important reason to have diversity at the table.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea that it's that whole conversation that we seem to keep coming back to, which is around problems focused, as in and then working towards solutions and clarifying what the problem really is. We find a lot of technology, and not even just technology, is we're solving for creating a solution, and we don't really know what the problem is, and we're solving for the wrong problem. And the acknowledgement of hearing a range of voices helps us to clarify that problem. And I imagine that in that engineering space, that's super important, because if somebody's making a tool or making a solution that's costing X amount of pounds, the clarity around are we solving for the right problem becomes actually a financial conversation as much as it is a moral and a philosophical challenge, right?
Yeah, and it also makes the whole area much easier for young people to relate to if we frame it as identifying problems and really being able to articulate them and unpick them, and then coming up with different ideas to solve those problems and experimenting and iterating and building. Those are things which I think are easier for a larger group of young people to relate to than going straight in at the product. Engineering is the creation of a specific product. And we did some really nice exercises showing them, this creative problem solving approach, and that the different voices in a team who might participate in that. And I think it opens it up. We can then say to people, well, that's a really fundamental part of engineering, whereas they have often had a very stereotypical view that it is just an extension out from maths and physics, really.
Yeah, or that it's just a manufacturing space, right? So and that, understandably, for whatever reason, has been a concept that engineering is about people building stuff and aeroplanes and engineers building bridges, and it is some of that, but there's a whole raft of disciplines and skill sets and options within engineering. I wonder if you could talk at that, because I think that is definitely worth thinking about, because as we get into talking about Engineering Week, which we'll come to in a moment, and thinking about passions, part of the issue that we've got is that there's a definition challenge around what engineering is and what isn't engineering, or what engineering isn't just pigeonholed into. So I wonder if you could talk at that about how you define engineering and what that means in terms of the problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, it's really the application of, scientific principles and skills and exploration to the solution of problems and the development of technologies and products to address those problems. And we would include digital skills and solutions within our footprint. And at the extremes, they look quite different. Someone who is, doing software engineering, and producing computer games may feel very different from someone who is involved in designing, the welding seams of a wind turbine. But actually, there's a huge amount in the middle where there's really, really a lot of overlap. And it is that breadth which I think makes it a very exciting area to work in. And in fact, there are over 6 million jobs in the UK in the engineering and technology footprint, which is almost a fifth of the workforce. It's 19% of the workforce who fall into that engineering and technology footprint, but are remarkably hidden to most people, and especially to young people who just stick with a very specific sense of what engineering is, which culture perpetuates. And actually, a lot of times when you see engineers on the television, they're talked about as scientists. I spend a lot of time shouting to the television, that's actually an engineer. or we now talk about innovation and innovators. And really, most of them, I would say, I think those are engineers and technologists. And so language, you might have a bit of nuance to it, but actually, if young people don't understand what this breadth is, it's very hard for them to get into it. And one of the areas we're really interested in at the moment is making sure that young people can see all the opportunities relating to climate change and environmental sustainability, because we know that that's a topic that many young people care about. But they tend to think, I really care about the planet, what should I do? And start thinking about zoology and ecology and plant sciences and conservation, biodiversity efforts, all of which are very, very important. I'm absolutely not undermining their importance. But actually, a lot of the mitigation and certainly the adaptation to climate change is dependent on engineering technology. And we know we have literally hundreds of thousands of jobs coming in those areas in engineering and technology by 2030, but they aren't the ones that come to mind. And I think if lots of young people are motivated by purpose, but then can only see a very restricted area, and it would be the same with caring for people. So if you think, well, I really care about people, I really want to make their lives better, actually, I think that often leads people into medicine and nursing and those sorts of areas. And actually, there's a huge amount of medical technology and bioengineering. And actually, I was at a conference earlier in the week from estates, from the health estates managers, all the engineers and everybody involved in the construction of hospitals and healthcare facilities, and then all the technology underpinning it and also enabling it to run more smoothly. It's an amazing area. And it was one of the ones where you think, oh, maybe that should have been my career. I was really fascinated by it, but a really hidden way in which you could be very involved in improving people's health.
And you think, like most people, like as a standard bloke in northwest England, you would think that the person who's the engineer starts at the design of the building. You'd understand there'd be some engineering elements in that. Okay, so the construction, the steel work, X, Y, and Z, and you understand that there might be some bioengineering that's going on in terms of the elements. But ultimately, there's the other bits that sit into there that we are probably not like heating that sits in that space, for example, and efficiencies around that, and the energy sources that come into that building, and then the traffic flow is an engineering challenge, right? And the way that, like, and as I'm just going like this and thinking about, actually, this is all engineering, right? And it's all got some creative problem solving that's required in that. And actually, you understand to some extent, like in a lot of organisations, a lot of schools in the UK, probably not as many as we'd like, but a lot of schools in the UK are talking about STEM and the focus and the involvement on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths, as something that we need to focus on heavily. And in fact, some schools actually have a STEM subject, and I'm not entirely sure what I think about that, but it's better than not having any of it as a discrete subject. I'm not entirely sure, but I wonder what you're seeing in education that you think is worth shouting about, and in terms of like that conversation around how we're getting early engineering education into the space.
Yeah, well, you both. I feel like there's a lot to do. Some quite angry shouting about. Without I hate to be an angry person, but actually, I feel like a lot of the noise I want to make are things that we are seeing that really need addressing in the system. So, you know, the huge decline we've seen in the take up of design and technology for various reasons, the expense of the subject, the teaching shortages, the shortages around professional development, the wider STEM teaching shortages, particularly physics, maths, computer science, a little bit of chemistry as well. And then the challenges in even uptake and in practical work as well. We've seen a real decline in the amount of practical work happening in the classrooms. So we published a science education tracker early in the year, which is a big study of young people's experiences of science and STEM education, and found that the amount of practical work that was being done, just in England, fortnightly, had fallen from 44 to 26% of students having any practical experience in a fortnight. And that's from 2019 to 2023. And, you know, and then we know that practical work is a hugely motivating aspect of learning science. And also D&T is a really popular subject. It's really popular with girls as well. So we're having these declines in the bits that are really engaging young people. They say they enjoy it, and I'm really authentically teaching skills and the dexterity that is used as you progress in those careers. So those are some things that are really quite worrying. And you talk about the presence of STEM in schools, and actually there are two bits. So one is the subjects, and yes, there's science and maths in schools, and they all have a bit of D&T, but a lot of them don't have much after the age of 14. There's very, very little engineering, and there's barely any connections in the curriculum to engineering. And we do think that, you know, one of the things that we really, really hope in this round of curriculum reform is that there is an opportunity to embed engineering into the curriculum, so every young person can understand, you know, how that is an extension out from science and into their lives. And once it's in the curriculum, we have the ability to hook the careers activities into it much more effectively. The other way schools talk about STEM is more as the extracurricular bit, and the STEM clubs, and STEM activities, and STEM days. And there are some really wonderful things that schools are doing off their own backs, or working with organisations like ours, or many hundreds of other organisations trying to support in those STEM activities. And that those are great and very inspiring and very impactful. But we do know that not every child has the opportunity to connect with them, and they need to do so on a really consistent process, in a consistent way, to have the impact that we need.
I absolutely agree, and I hear that. That makes me sad about the practicalities, right?
Yeah, God.
Because you think, interestingly, we all look back at technology sessions or science lessons that we had, and we remember the brilliance of and the importance. Nobody enjoyed writing up the methods and the results.
Yeah.
But I know it was necessary. It's a necessary point of it. I'm not saying that's not necessary, but we all loved it when they were doing we're doing a practical, right? And I think about that from a technology perspective as well. When we were working with the tools, when we were using the when we were in graphics and we were using the boards and being like old school. I'm old school, right? But that means, and interestingly, we interviewed on the podcast episode 242. I just checked back with Ben Edmonds and Aaron Patchin from the Inventor Club, who and their story is in one of these examples of trying to add some extracurricular opportunities in that space and helping people doing that inventor space. Ben used to work for Dyson and talks around how just letting and the title of that podcast we called it was "Let Kids Work It Out."
Yeah.
And that all playing and because we have that, and understandably, I know we've got to have standards, I know we've got to have coverage, and I know we've got to have make sure that there is value for money in education, and we're not messing about with young people's lives. I get that, but actually, the play element and the ability to creatively problem solve and to work it out, and for kids to work it out, young people to work it out in practical ways is valuable, because even if they get it wrong, there's learning happens in that space of how not to do it, and if they get it right, there's that collaborative working together and finding solutions and then being able to use that and learn from it going forward. And I think there is something that sits in there that really resonates. So I want to just take a little bit of a spin, because we are putting this episode out just before tomorrow's Engineers Week, which is in England on the 11th to the 15th of November. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's across the UK. 11th to 15th of November.
Yeah.
And in the middle, there, I just do a little shout out as well to National Engineering Day in the middle on the 13th. But we're doing this big effort to amplify messaging around engineering and technology careers in the schools, and asking we work with hundreds of organisations who are trying to engage young people with STEM and engineering and technology, having them all share their passions, and then asking teachers to get involved. And it's called Power Up Your Passion this year. We have a different theme every year. It's our 12th year of doing it, but showing that if young people follow their passions and interests, it will take them into engineering. I'm going to say we can always find that collection. I would love to find the one where we can't make it, but that we, under everything, we could find an engineering and technology career. And we're showcasing a range from, gaming, as I've said, computer games, to caring for others, to all sorts of interests that can take you into those careers. It's just that for many young people, they're not that visible, and they think of it as engineering. Oh, I don't think so, without thinking, oh, this is what I love.
Yep.
How can I do that thing?
Yeah, and do you know what the link to register is going to be in the show notes for people to register.
Oh, fantastic.
And so we would massively encourage people to showcase that and find out, as teachers, there's loads of resources, assemblies, lesson plans, film scene, all sorts in there. Feel free to go and have a look at that. And then what really resonated with what you were talking about there as a theme, and also as a way of teaching, right? So this is not just about engineering. This is about teaching, full stop. This is about education. It's about life, which is about helping people like power up your passion. So that as a phrase, power up your passion. When we were discussing where this podcast was going to go, I knew that as soon as we start talking about passion, something's going to come out, right? Because that is what it's about. I think about my passions. I'm passionate about lots of things. People would probably give me would say that, Ben, you don't do anything without passion, and that is probably true. There aren't many things apart from receipts and accounting. I don't do that with passion. But most things, if I'm going in, if I'm playing football, I'm going in passionately. If it's about music, I'm going to do that passionately. If it's about AI and technology and podcasting, I'm going to do it with passion. And interestingly, you talked about young people finding their passion, and there's a survey finding that I know that was shared with us that really I thought was really interesting, that 64% of young people want careers linked to their interests and passions. Now, I think that's probably because I would argue that a good chunk of those that aren't in that 64% I probably thinking I can't really say what I want, that my interest and passion are, because I don't know if I can get paid for it. And we've talked about ikigai and some of those other thought processes. Can I really get paid for something that I'm passionate about gaming, but
Yeah.
there's not going to be any work in that, or my mum and dad won't let me be that, or whatever else it is. So it's not that they don't want to go into a career that way, but careers linked to interests and passions is where we're going, right? So that's what. How do we find and encourage careers education and engineering education in that space to align people to their passions? How do we do that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just want to go back a step. So you're right. They absolutely should be enabled to follow their interests and passions. We also know that for many of them, salary and job security is a significant concern, and quite sensibly. And actually, it became more of a concern during the pandemic, and you could imagine why. And actually, I'd say it's okay. You can have them all. Because these are areas that we know are hugely in demand, and engineers and technologists are on average paid well above median wage. So actually they may not be aware of it when they're thinking, well, the most important thing for me is going to be money. Well, you might be able to have your cake and eat it on this occasion. So there is a really nice story to be told there. But it's just trying to create an awareness of the breadth of opportunity that there is across STEM, and particularly the visibility is low in engineering and technology. And there was some really interesting research that came out from the Careers and Enterprise Company earlier in the year, actually, about how young people who had any sorts of careers intervention that improved their career readiness, their sense that they knew about careers and what they wanted to do, the more that they had those careers experiences and were judged to be career ready, the more that their career aspirations actually aligned with labour market need. So they were understanding, these are the jobs that are available, and actually it makes sense for me to progress into them. But hopefully also still finding the ones that within that vast array are of interest to them. But interestingly, the more that they, again, were career ready, the more likely they were to buck gender stereotypes, which isn't quite as obvious. And the impact is so much that actually girls who scored highest on career readiness were twice as likely to say that they were interested in careers in engineering than those who didn't. So I think it is about enabling people. Actually, if they don't have the information, how would you know? And if you've got a gender stereotype society, the books that you're exposed to, and particularly the social media that you see, we know is incredibly divided by which gender you are. So there's very different content being channeled to you. And actually, you need to see the full breadth and have that opportunity.
If Steve were on the call today, he would definitely use this phrase: "You don't know what you don't know," and that is and also you can't see what you can't see. You can't be
Yeah,
what you can't see.
absolutely.
Sorry.
Yep.
And I'm absolutely aware that this is something that we have to do something about,
Yeah.
and it's not and because we are missing an absolute trick, aren't we? Because you've talked about creative solutions. You've talked about actually defining problems and whether they are real problems. But what we're talking about here is this sense of autonomy and a sense of dignity in terms of a young
I can
person's
do this.
passions. Right? I can do this, right?
Yeah.
So just because, I always think, like, I used to work in an FE college, and in that FE college, the engineering department, which was very aerospace related because of where we are in the country, which is connected. Okay, so and there's nothing wrong in that space, but it was always that in that FE space, the girls were always the minority in that space until, interestingly, there was a whole push in this college about championing some of our high flying female engineers.
Yeah, fantastic.
And we also appointed a curriculum manager and then a head of division who were female now in engineering, and it was almost unheard of. Now those people have actually moved on into other roles across the sector, but I remember that being quite significant because there wasn't another female head of division in engineering, as so it appeared. And what I don't know if anybody ever did any research and worked out that what the correlation was, because we ended up seeing more girls going into there because they saw somebody at the head of the division, somebody in the classroom who had been an engineer, and one of the lecturers out there who was in that space, who was female, had also worked on fighter jets and had done also. So she was became poster girl, right? And then some of the learners that were in that space became posters in that space because they booked a trend. But we're seeing that your own data, and I know it's backed up by other data that basically says the stats that talk about less than, is it 16%? I think the number we saw of girls believe that engineering is a viable career choice or a suitable career for them.
Yeah, that's what it's a 44% of boys, 16% of girls say engineering is a suitable career for them. And again, that's something we do a lot of work on in terms of showcasing really the full range of diverse role models. And we'll be doing it again in tomorrow's Engineers Week. And it is really important. And, there's a lot of interventions that go on. It's quite hard to really assess the evidence against them, just like you were saying. But there's pretty good evidence that having positive role models makes a difference. And certainly, girls will say that they're not seeing it. And I think it is also really important for teachers to know that employers are really incredibly keen to diversify their workforce. So I would say over the last 5 years, there's been a real change in the authenticity of their commitment to really making a change. And you can see it in the way in which they're really looking at recruiting in different ways, reaching out and working with groups and building relationships with them whilst they're still in schools, and just trying to open up pathways for people who may not have traditionally seen themselves in those roles. I would just say, don't worry if you think you're a traditional group, because we really need this massive growth in the workforce. So there is space for everyone, but actually, please, if you have any concern that you think historically people like you weren't as present in the workforce, actually, this is let's hope, the generation where we really see that step change in it. And you can see that there are increases in the recruitment of young women into the workforce, pretty much year on year. Occasionally it might slip back, but then it comes back up. And that is very intentional. And they're progressing really well. But there's an interesting thing as well, where I feel like if you start talking too specifically about specific jobs too early, you get more gendered uptake. And so you see, for example, if you look at the stats, I don't think it's about whether pathways are academic or vocational, but the earlier pathways tend to be the more vocational ones, and the gender balance is worse in them than people who are able to choose later and later. And so again, I think being able to keep a breadth of opportunity open is really important for young people as well. And of course, it works in both directions. There are other careers which are seen as traditionally female, which it can be very hard for boys and young men to see themselves progressing into.
Do you know what's interesting in that space is that we've talked a little bit around that specificity and generality in terms of education, full stop, right? So as soon as we silo content or skills to a particular subject discipline and don't acknowledge that it's always going to be cross-discipline, almost always going to be there's going to be multiplicities. Yes, we can use computational thinking in English, we can use design and creative stuff in maths. Like they're not silos, they're not disparate subjects. And I think what we're talking about here is kind of echoing that statement, that the more you go specific too soon, you're going to miss the opportunities for young people to thrive, right?
And actually, we're having quite a lot of fun at the moment because we've got a cross-curricular project, which people can find on our EUK education website, which will also have the Tomorrow's Engineers Week content. But it's called the Climate Schools Programme. And we've produced lesson plans for science, geography, and English. And it is all about making the connection between climate change and the careers that can help mitigate it, and particularly obviously in engineering and technology. But actually in the English lessons, we've got some really interesting activities around the language that is used around climate change and how it makes young people feel. And part of that is we want to make sure we are using language in all of our conversations that make them not feel despondent, but actually that they can understand the situation, but see ways to move forward and feel perhaps empowered to make a difference. And then also there's some debates there around some of the, the ethical issues that engineers look at. And again, I think it's a really interesting aspect of engineering where when you're solving these problems, you're weighing up all sorts of decisions, which might be on, the cost of a thing to produce versus the amount that you'll be able to produce it, but really some much more complex ones, and particularly understanding the benefits and risks around decisions you're making in relation to climate change is really challenging. And there's a lot of work across the community around more teaching of engineering ethics, but we're kind of interested to show young people, if you're interested in the more tricky problems, in unpicking ethical issues, but in this sort of domain, there's space for you too,
It's almost like you spotted and realised that I used to be a religious studies and philosophy teacher.
Oh.
So when you started talking there, my eyes lit up a little bit because the whole conversation around ethics and philosophy and rights and wrongs and understanding absolutes and relatives, that is right in there. And interestingly, on the GCSE religious studies specification, genetic engineering is a challenge in there. So obviously it's an engineering.
It's one of the very few references to engineering in the curriculum.
It is. But and the irony of it is that the deep-seated conversations about what that means for humanity and what we can do in terms of like genetically modified foods and what that then means. It's not just about creating superhumans, but it's something else in that space, and that's really powerful. But what I'm also intrigued by is that we need to have these conversations about, and I'm not saying that we necessarily have the conversation now, but like we need to start having the conversation because the objection to things like fracking, for example, and understandable, but there was a benefit, but then there was going to be a cost to that. So how do we weigh that up?
Yeah, where do we draw the lines?
And that is like saying there is a role here for lots and lots of different types of thinkers and lots of different people who are skilled in that. And what I really like is that what we're talking about here is that there are technical roles in engineering. There are some very maths, science, physics skills required, but these more and interestingly, we've said this before, that we argued for a long time that the phrase soft skills should just be thrown into that language piece. That should be thrown into the bin. I wrote an article about 4 years ago and said, let's call them power skills. And a few people have started using the word power skills and human skills are really important. And actually, they are vital in this engineering space as well from a creativity perspective, right?
Yeah, and then it comes back to the diversity point as well. That actually you can't just sit and have an ethical discussion with one person. You really need those diversity of perspectives and experiences and representation to be teasing apart how those decisions are made.
Yeah, and so we, like I said, we'll put the links in the show notes to Engineering Week. Tomorrow's Engineering Week. But 51, I've seen some, I'm just reading some bits here, 51,000 UK students last year, and you're hoping to engage more than that this year. The fact that it's in its 12th year, that there's free resources for educators to upskill themselves and to work with their young people, dealing with big challenges like net zero and all those kind of things. We can really, really have an impact in that. I wonder, is there anything today, before we get into some quick fire questions for you, are there any, is there anything today that you feel like we've not talked about that you feel like we should talk about?
Yeah, you know what, I'm going to say that I mentioned our new EUK education website, and we've been talking about Tomorrow's Engineers Week, but there's a whole load of other stuff that we do for schools. The activities are free. Some of them are in school. Some of them are things you can come and visit the Big Bang Fair, which is fantastic, next June. But there are loads of opportunities, and we also offer bursaries for many of those opportunities for schools that have got large proportions of students who are underrepresented in the engineering and technology workforce. So do go along, get involved in Tomorrow's Engineers Week, but also look at everything else we have. And then we also host a whole load of activities which we don't run. So there's another platform, Neon, and the website's Neon Futures, but if you search for it, you'll find it, and you can link to it through EUK Education, and that's got a whole load of careers, resources and case studies, but lists hundreds of activities that teachers can sort through by age group or content to see what's available, because we know that there's a lot out there and it could be hard to navigate. So it's really to help them do that, and we do have a quality assurance process before activities get listed as well. So if you have teachers out there who've hung out till the end, I should have probably mentioned it at the start, but please do take a look.
Yeah, brilliant. Perfect. Okay, we always, at the end of a podcast, leave or ask 3 quickfire questions. And they are, we don't share them in advance, but if anybody's listened, you know that we have a bit of a theme for a few months. So the 3 quickfire questions are these. So the first one is, if you could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
Purpose. I think it would be, I feel that the purpose of education has been to give everybody a good education, and that is very important. But I would also say DFE should be thinking about creating the future workforce as well, and you can do both.
Love it.
That was a long answer to a quick question.
No, it's a good answer. It's a good answer. Second question is, what's the most exciting educational trend that you see emerging?
Oh, exciting. I can't think of. Okay, I'm going to say upheaval. There we go. I've got an answer. Yeah. So an educational trend in England over the next year will be reform. It will be change. So it will be an evolution of the curriculum. It will be the introduction of Skills England. I see, looking at the growth and skills levy for apprenticeships, there's huge opportunity to actually make the system just work better. And it's a really long time since so many things have been live. So yeah, I'll go with upheaval. There we go.
Love it, love it. I'm with you on that, by the way. And the third one, the final one, is, who's your biggest inspiration in education?
Oh, in education, do you know what? I would say Sir John Holman, who is someone who I used to work with very closely at Wellcome, and was a former director of the STEM Learning Centre, was a STEM czar in government many, many years before, and also was heavily involved in writing the Gatsby careers benchmarks, and just has a very impactful passion for this area, and certainly supported me through a lot of my work.
Love that. That's lovely to hear. So thank you for that. So don't forget, click the links in the show notes to get involved in Engineering UK and Tomorrow's Engineers Week. The links will be in the show notes. And also, if you haven't yet got your tickets for the Edufuturists Uprising 2025, tickets are going. And I know it's not till June, and you think, I don't need to worry about it till then. But if you want to get hold of your tickets to where we celebrate educators and educational institutions from all around the world, actually, in Manchester on the 25th of June 2025, get your tickets. The links are in the show notes. And Hilary, it has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the Edufuturists podcast, and we look forward to hearing all about how tomorrow's Engineers Week goes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Good to talk with you.
Thanks for chatting.